Gloria will have that. Gloria will make sure that we get those at the end. So any question or any comment anyone wishes to make, please put it there. This morning is the third of our 7 workshops, which are on the recent developments in public policy. Our first speaker is Richard Zipfel, and all of you would know Richard was a founder member of the Catholic Association for Racial Justice. He's a trustee, and for very many years, Richard has been calling together people for meetings to support and help Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities, something that's very close to his heart. And this morning, Richard will speak to us on the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, obviously our interest being on the possible adverse effects on the Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities. And I hand over now to Richard.
Thanks, Yogi. Gloria, could I have the slides up? Thank you. Okay, this is the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, which just became law. And we're looking at a specific section of the act, which has to do with unauthorized encampments and affects Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities. Next slide, please. The background to this is in April 2022, it became law, but that followed a year of debate in Parliament and a year of going back and forth between the Lords and the Commons, and the Lords suggesting amendments and the Commons often not accepting them. The main focus of the news and the debate has been around the right to protest. And some feel the legislation was motivated largely by Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, and Insulate Britain protests. However, in the act, there are other important issues. And one important section deals with the criminalization of unauthorized encampments. And this could have a very adverse effect on Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities. Thank you. I'll just take you through part of the section of the act that we're looking at. Section 83 of the act provides that an offense is committed if a person aged 18 or over is residing or is intending to reside on land without the consent of the occupier of the land, and they have or intend to have at least one vehicle with them on the land. They have caused or are likely to cause significant damage, disruption, or distress. And without reasonable excuse, they fail to comply as soon as reasonably practicable with a request made by an occupier of the land, a representative of that occupier, or a constable. A request to leave the land and remove their property. A person also commits an offense if without reasonable excuse they enter or re-enter the land within 12 months of a request to leave. And they re-enter or enter with an intention of residing there without the consent of the occupier. And they have or intend to have at least one vehicle with them on the land. So that's the offense. The penalty for that offense, the maximum penalty, is 3 months imprisonment, a fine of £2,500, or both. Any property seized by the police may be retained by the police for 3 months, or if criminal proceedings are commenced until the conclusion of those proceedings. Now just think about that. For Gypsy, Roma, and traveler families, they go onto the land. They couldn't find anywhere else to go. They stay on after they've been asked to leave. And in the extreme condition, they could be fined £2,500, which might mean losing their savings. Their caravan and property could be confiscated, which is losing their home. One or both of the parents could go to prison. And in that case, children would obviously be taken into care. So that's the offense and the penalty which this act opens up. I'm not saying that would always happen or the police would act that way always, but that's the legislation. Next slide, please, Gloria. Do the police want these new powers? Well, there's considerable evidence that quite a few police do not want these powers. And Friends, Families, and Travelers, in their submission to the Public Bill Committee in May 2021, said this: in recognition of the equality and human rights implications of criminalizing trespass, the majority of police forces and police and crime commissioners that responded to the Home Office consultation opposed the proposal to criminalize trespass. Only 21% supported criminalization of trespass. And a separate question, 93% called for greater site provision as the solution to unauthorized encampments. So the police seem to not want more legislation, punitive legislation, but more site provision, which leads us to the question of, are there sufficient sites? On the 14th of January, Friends, Families, and Travelers released research showing the lack of pitches available on public traveler sites in England. The report revealed that while over 1,696 households were currently on waiting lists for pitches, there were just 59 permanent and 42 transit pitches available nationwide. Separately, Open Democracy has found that Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities are being forced to live on contaminated land. Even these are authorized pitches, by motorways and near sewage works. 2/3 of the 60 short-term transit sites in England and just over half of the country's 242 permanent sites are within 100 meters of one or more such hazards. So we have people with large number of people looking for sites and unable to find them. And even those who are on authorized sites often being located in in areas hazardous to health. There are alternative approaches to punitive legislation. One alternative approach has been successful in Leeds. It's referred to as negotiated stopping. Leeds City Council negotiates with Gypsy, Roma, and traveler groups to allow them to stay on a piece of land for a period of time if they agree to certain conditions around behavior, health, and safety, and waste. And this seems to be working very well. There's also an approach by churches in the northeast of England, led by the Church of England, I believe, where they have agreed to offer areas of church land as sanctuary stopping places. Thanks, Gloria. So finally, there are questions we may want to ask about the legislation and about the specific part of the legislation that that will have an impact on Gypsy, Roma, and traveler groups. One, is it compatible with the Human Rights Act and the public sector equality duty under the Equality Act? Are the measures in the legislation proportionate and reasonable, particularly when there are insufficient authorized sites and stopping places? Will the criminalization of trespass actually reduce unauthorized encampments, or will it just increase the polarization, alienation, and exclusion? And are there alternative approaches that would be better for all concerned? Thanks, Yogi. That's it.
Thank you, Richard. So I will now ask if anybody has a burning question, a question you'd like to put to Richard or to somebody else on the panel. Or anyone wants to make a comment?
I just have a Yogi, I have a
Nalini?
question. I'm just wondering, hi, I was just wondering if the Catholic Church in England has responded in any way so far.
Well, I don't want to go on record as saying they have not responded, but I'm not aware of, well, we have a CARJ network that has some 50 people, including the national chaplain and 7 or 8 diocesan chaplains to travelers. And they have certainly been looking at this carefully. Even in the Northeast, which is the Durham Diocese for the Church of England, where they've agreed to release church land to create sanctuary stopping places, the actual movement of that from agreeing it at the top to having it implemented in parishes and areas is a slow process. So as far as I know, there's been nothing like the agreement at the top to release church land, but there's an interest at various levels in what's going on in the Northeast. And I think there's also maybe an issue that the Catholic Church in England, or in England and Wales, does not have the sort of land that might be released that the Church of England has. That's just my impressions.
I think it would be right to say that we should congratulate and support the Anglican Church in all that they are doing, and that they have always been trying to do for the Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities.
If I could just bring this back, one of the issues here is the police. That's the workshop. And this is an area where the police are caught by the legislation, in a sense. They're nudged by the legislation to a more punitive approach, where they might actually prefer a less punitive approach.
Thank you, Richard. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to push on because I'd like to go into breakout groups as early as possible. Our second speaker is David Michael, MBE. David has served for 30 years in the Metropolitan Police Service, where he was Detective Chief Inspector, moving on to the Serious Crime Directorate at Scotland Yard. David is a founder member of the Metropolitan Black Police Association, which led to the United Kingdom National Black Police Association. Among many accolades, David was the winner of the Positive Roles Model, Race, Religion and Faith Award at the National Diversity Awards in 2013. David was a member of the Catholic Police Guild, and we proudly say has been a long association with the Catholic Association for Racial Justice. David will speak to us today on the police action plan released to address race disparities, specifically how this affects Black people and their changing legacy of distrust. I give you David Michael. You're muted, David.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm still a member of the Catholic Police Guild. Yeah, so police racism has been a bone of contention, certainly from the 1960s and 70s after mass emigration from the Caribbean, and during the efforts of mostly the Labour government to legislate against race discrimination. And it's been admitted by senior politicians that senior police officers lent on them over the years to try to exempt the police service from obligations under successive race discrimination legislation. The Lord Scarman's report into the Brixton disorders in 1981 and the Stephen Lawrence inquiry report recommendations after the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence in South London in 1993 were seminal reports into police racism. There have been numerous inquiries, especially within the Metropolitan Police, about police racism, and there's many individuals over the years who've campaigned against police racism, and it's well documented. After the racist murder of Floyd George by Minneapolis police in the United States, that triggered the Black Lives Matter movements in the United States, and also the multiracial intergenerational Black Lives Matter in the United Kingdom. There were many highlighted cases of disparities in police response to activities, protests and activities in Black communities, especially in London, but across the United Kingdom. And also there have been highlighted cases of the stop and search of the Great Britain sprinter Bianca Williams, as well as the shocking case of police officers photographing the dead bodies of Nicole Smallman and Bibba Henry, for which at least a couple of officers have been received a prison sentence. So it was following that the police race action plan was conceived with the main intention of improving policing for Black people. It was clear, and at the moment, this is to address policing affecting Black people. So it's not diluted, and any other minorities will follow on from this. The plan is in draft form at the moment. It's a series of proposals for all police services in England and Wales to become anti-racist organisations and to better understand Black communities. The aim is to give police officers the tools they need to build trust and confidence with Black communities so they are better equipped to challenge racism and address any ingrained cultures and biases that may be fueling racial disparities across policing. It seeks to create an anti-racist culture, mindset, values, and behaviour within policing, which will inform operational policing practice, improving the experience and outcomes for Black people. It will also enable the lived experience of Black communities to have a direct influence on police policies and police practices moving forward. The Police Race in Action Plan was released by the National Police Chiefs Council. That was formerly known as the Association of Chief Police Officers, and the College of Policing. They are the main custodians of it, but they have been joined by the Police and Crime Commission, Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. And this is to enable policing in England and Wales to become anti-racist. The Police Race Action Plan has been subject to further independent scrutiny from the public, police officers, police staff, other experts, and it will be finalised. It's in draft form at the moment. It will be finalised in December this year. It's to address the significantly lower levels of trust and confidence and race disparities in policing that the chief officer's claim cannot be currently fully explained. The Chief Constable with main responsibility, Sir David Thompson, has done a preamble to it, and he acknowledges police racism, but some of his other comments do not indicate that he's 100% accepting the widespread nature of police racism. And certainly, although all the chief constables of all the police services in England and Wales have accepted and signed up to this plan, they have not subscribed to the fact that British policing is still institutionally racist. The plan defines anti-racism in policing as tackling racial disparities, proactively accepting them as problems, whatever their cause, because of the impact they have on Black people. There is an independent board, independent scrutiny board, which has been set up to scrutinise the progress of the chief officers on that. It's led by a barrister called Abimbola Johnson, and she has recruited a scrutiny board to work with her. And that's one of the checks the chief officers are using to chart their progress. There is a public survey which anyone can respond to, and this survey is open for consultation until the 22nd of August. So the key actions of the plan are that Black people and communities are properly represented within policing, with the internal culture that promotes inclusivity and supports development and progression, that Black people and communities are respected and treated in a fair and equitable way, that Black people and communities are routinely involved in the governance of policing, that Black people are protected and properly supported as victims of crime and vulnerable groups. There are distinct programs and delivery plans led by a range of chief constables across the police service who will continue to be responsible for delivery of the plans. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much, David. And I was just wondering if anybody has a question they wish to pose to you. No? So what we'll do now is to put you... Oh, sorry, Maggie. Maggie has a question.
Well, Yogi, I was just going to ask, is David staying for the breakout groups, or is this our last opportunity? Yeah, okay, perfect. So.
No, David is staying with us. He's going to stay with us, and hopefully when we come back to the plenary, he'll be able to give answers. Well, try to anyway. We're going to go out into 2 breakout groups now. And what we would like you to do, is to remember which group you're in. We'd like you to have somebody who would feed back for about a minute. So whatever your discussion on the questions, Gloria is going to put a question to all of you in the chat. So if you see the question in the chat, there will be 2 questions, one on Richard Stork and one on David Stork. And if you can discuss both those and have somebody report back. And we're coming back at about 10:45. So you have 15 minutes. Is that okay? Great. So Gloria, would you put us into 2 groups, please? Thanks, Gloria. I'm going to take us a group by group so that we can hear. I think there were only 2 groups. Were there, Gloria?
Yes, only 2 groups.
Right. So we'll hear from group 1 first. The first talk. So the first talk was on Richard, on the traveller community. First group, please.
Okay, so thanks, Yogi. That's me for the group. When we talked about the first question, I think it was very clear that we were shocked that there were only 59 sites, and that seemed to be a key problem. And that it just seemed very unfair on Gypsy, Roma and travellers that actually they're quite caught because there aren't enough sites for them. And even in terms of, say, rubbish, where it's been observed they will collect their rubbish and put it in bags, but because there isn't a proper official site, it's not collected, so they get a bad reputation unfairly. And it also just seemed quite shocking that the consequences of losing your home, your possessions, being put in prison, and even the amount, 2,500, is huge for people. It just didn't seem to make sense for simply, parking in a field when you've got nowhere else to go, really. Someone mentioned a really good point about a while back, a 12-year-old boy being murdered by other children after school. The 12-year-old was either a Gypsy or Roma or a traveller, I'm not sure. But it was the silence of the community that was particularly shocking. And even the schools were invited to take part, and there were initiatives to kind of help, but only 4 out of 30 schools did get involved. So in terms of mitigating it, the ideas were, number one is something that parishes, number one was what could we do in terms of contacting our local MPs and councillors, and recognising that not everyone naturally feels as an activist, so how can that be helped? And then secondly, in terms of, so parishes and their role, so thinking that actually they have a really privileged, excellent position of power to really change things and bring these groups together and close that gap and raise awareness. I don't know if you wanted me to answer question 2 just yet, or just... Not yet,
just question 1. Thanks, Nali. And I think Maggie is going to speak on for group 2. On question 1.
So I had Yogi and Richard in the group with me. So we also essentially concentrated on the first question. And yet we agreed that there was a serious adverse impact, or potentially a serious adverse impact. And a lot would depend on how the legislation was implemented. But given the hostile environment, it encouraged other groups within society, it was potentially, it was a really serious adverse impact. We also had it sounds like we had the same discussion as group 2, because we also, group 1, sorry. We also thought that were sort of surprised at the low number of sites, and that was the key issue to focus in on. And there could be a range of things done. We talked about for CARG, their group, finding out a bit more, either directly or through other groups, what's actually happening around lobbying for more sites, either on a kind of area by area basis or in a more coordinated way. And also discuss, the one thing that sort of comment on the last report was that I had raised the issue about sometimes politicians find it more difficult to be positive about GRT communities than the appointed officials. Sometimes you can actually get further with the people who actually want to get the problem solved, whereas politicians have to deal with the hostile environment of the settled community. So I think that was all, wasn't it, Yogi? The key things, but we need to do something practically. That was certainly true.
Thank you for that, Maggie. We'll go now to the question set by David, and we'll return to Nali. Are you going to answer the second one as well, please?
Yeah, certainly. So from this one, we actually all admitted it was actually quite hard not to be quite cynical about it, and that this approach has been done in the past and the promised effects didn't really materialize. There was a question, you know, what's new and what's specific that's there. Definitely we felt there needed to be some initial training and education for police officers, and hearing from people in these communities, especially in those early stages as they're training, meeting with these communities and getting to know them. What we thought would be a big bit of hope is dependent on the monitoring. So if there was really strong monitoring, but also sincerity, I think that was the thing. If that's not there, it's not going to work. So it was that sincerity of heart and very strong monitoring along the way that would offer hope. Brendan, Janet, I hope, is that it? Or have I missed anything?
No, sounds good. We'll keep you on.
Thanks, Brendan. So then we'll move on to Maggie for the second group, please, Maggie. I think Maggie had something very important to share.
Well, no, it was only, we didn't actually get to this question in our group. So it was really more my plea for help, saying, I was very involved in the policing change in Northern Ireland back as part of the peace process there. So I would understand, and you know, Richard was saying we should support the action plan, and I agree, but I think that as the other group has already said, we've had lots of these action plans over time, and it needs to now sort of be translated into effective change. So I read it, and I had a couple of thoughts, but particularly this issue about engaging more directly with the communities that it's meant to be, you know, building confidence in. We did the Pattern Commission that was set up in Northern Ireland did a lot of work on that, about how, just quickly for those of you who aren't aware of it, at the time of through most of the conflict and before, the population in Northern Ireland is 40%. I'll use Catholic Protestant because it's easier than everything else. 40% Catholic and 56% Protestant, and the police force had 8% Catholics in it. So you know, same sorts of issues in terms of representation, lack of confidence in the minority community, and so on.
You've muted yourself, Maggie.
So thank you very much, Yogi. Sorry, something really radical was needed. And that's why we had the Pattern Commission as part of the peace process. So I just think I definitely was intending to sort of forward to Kaj after this some thoughts about some additional things that could be, you know, considered within the action plan. And I was delighted to hear that you can actually make individual submissions. But the real issue is to get out and about. I mean, and it still sounds very much as though it's going to be the police force, police service, making these changes, which is really difficult to do if you're already predominantly not from the community that you're trying to build confidence in, and so on. And going back to our previous discussion, if you're going to then sort of exacerbate your relationship with Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities by constantly picking up on illegal encampments, you're going to have even more race problems. So that's it. Sorry to go on so long, but we didn't get a chance to discuss it in our group, so it gave me a chance
to say thank you very much, Maggie. Very importantly, that, you know, to hear what you have said. I'm now going to ask if you have any questions that you wish to put to either David or to Richard. We'll take those now. I'm aware that Brendan has not said anything, nor Janet. So Brendan and Janet, if there is anything you wish to share or wish to comment on, please let us know. Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered in our, when we were in rooms, the points that we were making. I just felt very old, because I felt that particularly the debate on the police, I've heard it so often before, and I thought, God, you know, do we ever make progress? I hope we do. But I do feel very strongly that even if it's not perfect, the plan at the moment, if they're really sincere, they will set up really tight monitoring to hold police services to account to the extent to which they're implementing what's already in that report. You know, so often the monitoring is where it falls down. And if the police don't feel accountable to implementing it, then it'll just slide into the background again.
Thanks, Brendan. Janet? You're muted, Janet, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just aware that there's no one from the Roma community here this morning. And it's that lack of communication, lack of understanding. I went with the Roma young man, he was 16, to Czechoslovakia, and I was horrified by the way the Roma were treated there, that it doesn't seem to be as big an issue as it perhaps should be in this country. We need to be more aware of their difficulties. They're very much a minority community, a very small one, that shouldn't be overlooked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hand over to David for 2 minutes and then to Richard for 2 minutes, please, and then we'll close. Is there anything, David, you want to round up on?
Yes, thank you very much, Yogi, and everyone else, and thanks for your interest and the remarks you've made. I would certainly encourage CARJ not just to support the plan, but to make a critical analysis of the plan and to feed that back. I as well as being a veteran police officer, I'm also a law graduate, and I've kind of practiced in criminal legal defense work. I'm used to reading reports and acts of parliament, but I find it very difficult the way this plan is written. So I think that's one thing I'm going to feed back to the custodians. It probably needs a different writer to go. It should be accessible to
the ordinary person,
the residents, people. And the way it's written at the moment, I find there'll be a lot of barriers to access to everyone. The other point that's just been made is during the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, a criminologist called Dr. Robin Oakley represented the Commission for Racial Equality, as it was then called. And he said, if the police service is institutionally racist, they can't fix it on their own. They need external help.
Indeed.
And as has already been mentioned, I'm really, really concerned that the chief officers and the College of Policing and now all the police and crime commissioners, as far as I'm aware, there's only one black and one brown police and crime commissioner. What is their knowledge and experience of police racism or racism on a whole? So that really concerns me that they have taken custodian. And there are many people with expertise in race and policing criminal justice, and I have not seen their names mentioned whatsoever in the literature that they used while they were putting the plan together. And they've made no reference to those of us who highlighted and were campaigning about police racism over several decades. So I encourage individually and as an association that we make a critical analysis, and we and also they rarely, just doing an online survey is not good enough. There actually needs to be much more engagement with community groups and organisations in a meaningful way. And yes, I think much more needs to be done. And for me, I would always welcome any effort to address the situation. But I think the chiefs have gone about it the wrong way. And hopefully some of us can hold the mirror up to them and they can reflect on that.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to give Richard 30 seconds or just 45 seconds now. Sorry about this, Richard, time-wise.
Well, I said in the group that this raised for me, the discussion raised for me a new thought, because we have this traveler support network that meets 3 times a year. And there's a lot of exchange of information and experience and all that goes on among the chaplains and others. But we've never tried to raise any funding for that network because it costs us nothing to bring people together for 3 times a year. But I suddenly thought that there might be a research project of some sort, whether you call it research or not, to try to, for CARJ to try to get from the through the network, but not asking the chaplains to do more work, but to get a piece of, call it research, that gives us a more accurate picture of what's actually happening on the ground in different places. And are there lots and lots and lots of bad experiences, or are there lots and lots and lots of good experiences that don't get the press, or both? Anyway, it's a possible project, just as I think feeding into the action plan consultation is another possible project.
Thank you, Richard. I want to say a very, very big thank you to David for giving up his morning to come to speak to us. And yes, it's a very small group, David, but this has been videoed and it will go out to a much bigger group. The whole idea is that we're being educated. So thank you ever so much for giving up your time. I know Maggie has a burning question, so I'm going to give Maggie 30 seconds.
Sorry, can I just, I really agree with David's point about making a CARJ submission. I'd be happy to just do a first very short draft to send to all of you.
Excellent.
If David would sort of comment on it, that would be great. And then that would be something that you could both use and encourage individuals. If the deadline for the individuals is 22nd of August, so that's quite soon. That wasn't to cut across Richard, excellent idea, but that may be more longer term sort of thing. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maggie. That's appreciated, very much so. Richard, Richard works flat out, 24/7. He works for CARJ, and he does so much that, you know, saying thank you is almost become meaningless now, because I don't know how we can. We're so grateful to Richard for holding us together, for organizing all of these talks, and this is the third. We've got 4 to go, and Richard has quite a lot of work behind it. And because he couldn't get anybody else to do the work today, he did it himself. And well done, Richard. We appreciate that very much. So thank you, David, and thank you, Richard. And thank you to all of you for coming this morning. It's a beautiful morning, and you've given up the hour, and I hope you've got something out of it. Thank you.
I think Melanie has a question.
No, Melanie, just Melanie saying thank you. Melanie saying, Nalini saying thank you.
And thanks,
so thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the morning. God bless.